video number 2 of this series entitled, Will You Judge Them? Oh, Son of Man, will you judge them? So that's the title of the series, right? This is a 3-part series, and the reason that it's a 3-part series is because I found that there was 3 times that God said this to Ezekiel. Will you judge them, son of man? Will you judge them? And each time he gave him, after he asked that question, he gave them, or Ezekiel, a different assignment. So part 1 is actually taken from Ezekiel chapter 20 verse 4. Ezekiel chapter 20 verse 4, and the assignment that Ezekiel was given is this. So it says, will you judge them, son of man? Will you judge them? Then make known to them the abominations of their fathers. And so that's what we're going to be looking at actually today. That's what we're going to be looking at. Yesterday when we considered Ezekiel chapter 4, the reference that was we were sent to was found in Ezekiel chapter 16. And it was Ezekiel chapter 16 verse number 2, which says, Son of man, cause Jerusalem to know her abominations. So in video 1, when we talked about that, that answered for us who the them was. Because remember, it says, will you judge them, son of man? Will you judge them? And I don't know if you've ever had this experience when somebody is talking to you and they'll be like, and they, and this, and they, that, and they said, instead of saying who the individual is, they said they, right? And so you'd be like, well, who is they? Well, here in Ezekiel chapter 20 verse 4, when it says, will you judge them? Oh, son of man, will you judge them? That's what my question was. Well, who is them? And so Ezekiel chapter 16 actually answered that. It says Jerusalem. And the significance about Jerusalem is Jerusalem was the place of worship. It was the place of worship. It was the place that bore God's name. So today, the place of worship is what we call church, right? So there is a charge. God is telling Ezekiel to judge them, to judge this place of worship, and to make known to this place of worship the abominations of her father. So in the first video, I hope that you had a chance, the opportunity to look at it. But in case you didn't, just a little background on it. The first video, we went over that background. The first 14 verses of Ezekiel chapter 16, we were able to look at how it was that Jerusalem became chosen as being the city of God, or not the city of God, but the place of worship, the place that will hold God's name. And we went into detail about that. And so this part here, now that we know who the they is, we're going to look at the second command that God gave Ezekiel when he said, he didn't just say to judge them, but he said, make known to them the abominations of their fathers. And so we're going to consider that by looking at verses 16 through 30. Verse 16 through 30. And so what I decided to do with this first video is to just focus on this one verse number 15, and dig into that instead of trying to take it all, because what I found, because I went over it already, what I found is it's a lot of information. So for this video number 2, this video is entitled, if I had to give it a title, it is called The Call for Clarity of the Charge of Harlotry. And the reason why I'm looking at making sure that we're clear about it, looking for the clarity in this, is because he said to make it known to them what the abominations are. And To know something is to be aware through observance, inquiry, or information. To be aware. So we're about to clear this thing up, and we're about to figure out what it is, what the abomination is, what it was that Jerusalem did then in the days that this was written. And it wasn't just written by Ezekiel. Jeremiah was saying the same thing. Isaiah, Habakkuk was fussing about like the stuff that was going on and the wickedness of Jerusalem. Practically all of your prophetic books, is addressing this thing, including Revelation. So let's dig into this now, and let's get some clarity on what was happening. And in the process of getting that clarity, let's see if any of the things that we're looking at as far as what happened to Jerusalem, if any of those things are happening today. Let's get some clarity on this. So, verse 15, let's see. Mark these off as I'm going over it because I don't want to miss anything. Alrighty. So, beginning at verse 15, this is what it says. We're going to read it first. It says, "But you trusted in your own beauty, played the harlot because of your fame, and poured out your harlotry on everyone passing by who would have it." So we're going to look at that first part first, because there's 2 points that I saw here in this verse. Number one, it said that they trusted in their own beauty. And number two says that they played the harlot. They played the harlot. Kind of like, okay, so when I read that about them playing the harlot, what I think of, the visual picture that in my mind that I get is a picture of a child playing grown up. You know how a child will put on their parents' shoes and dress up and be in the mirror and be playing like playing grown up or whatever, a young child. So it says they played the harlot because of their fame and poured out their harlotry on everyone passing by who would have it. So let's dig into this. The reference, there was three in reference to trusting in their own beauty. There were three different references that was given. The first one was Deuteronomy 32:15. The second was Jeremiah chapter 7 verse 4, and the third was Micah chapter 3 verse 11. Now of those three references, I only went over one, so you'll have to look at the other two in your spare time. Jeremiah chapter 7 verse 4, as well as Micah chapter 3 verse 11. And when you do, if you do a video, please tag me in it so that I can see what you have gleaned, and that could complement my personal studies. What you glean and what you learn will complement my personal studies. But for now, let's dig into this, the part that I actually looked up and I'm sharing with you. Again, it's coming from Deuteronomy chapter 32. It's verse number 15. And this is what it says. It says, "But Jeshurun, 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 but Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. You grew fat. You grew thick. You are obese. Then he forsook God who made him and scornfully esteemed the rock of his salvation." There is a lot to unpack in that verse. Hold on one second. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack in that verse, starting with who is Jeshurun, because we're talking about Jerusalem. So who is Jeshurun? Well, let's look at it. The reference note for that takes us to Deuteronomy chapter 32. It's verse 5 and verse number, is it 32 or 33? Deuteronomy chapter 33. I'm sorry about that. Verse 5 and verse number 26. Yes, verse 26. So this is what verse 5 says. It says, "And he was king in Jeshurun when the leaders of the people were gathered, all the tribes of Israel together. So it says he was king in Jeshurun. The note for that verse 5 of Deuteronomy chapter 33 says, Jeshurun is a poetic term for Israel. It says, Moses' reference to the Lord as king in Jeshurun provides a basis for the march of conquest of verse 2. We're not going to go back and read verse 2 because we got the information that we just needed as far as who is Jeshurun. It said it's a poetic term for Israel. I want to take a look though also at verse 26 because that was listed too. So verse 26 says, there is no one like the God of Jeshurun, who rides the heavens to help you in his excellency and in his excellency on the clouds. So again, Jeshurun represented Israel. Now Israel as a whole is 12 individual tribes, 12 tribes that make up Israel. So in reference to Israel, it said that they grew fat and kicked. It says again, this is Deuteronomy 32:15, you grew fat, you grew thick, you are obese. Then he forsook God who made him and scornfully esteemed the rock of his salvation. Now y'all know, I had to dig into that. First of all, I had to dig into it because it talked about him being fat or growing fat like several times. It says you grew fat. Then it said it again, you grew fat. It said you grew thick. And then it says you are obese. So I'm like, yeah, you didn't caught my attention. What does that mean to grow fat? The reference notes for that would be Deuteronomy chapter 31, verse 20. Psalm chapter 17, verse 10. Jeremiah chapter 2, verse 7. Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 7. And verse number 28. So we're going to look at 2 of those verses, possibly 3, most likely the first 2, which is Deuteronomy 31:20, and then we'll look at Psalm 17:10. So let's go over to Deuteronomy. It says, this is what it says. And remember, we're talking about the fact that Israel now, as a nation, the whole, was said that they grew fat, like you grew real thick, like you grew obese, like. So it says, when I have brought them, this is Deuteronomy 31:20, when I have brought them to the land flowing with milk and honey, of which I swore to their fathers, and they have eaten and filled themselves. It says, and grown fat. Then they will turn to other gods and serve them, and they will provoke me and break my covenant. So let's dig into this one now. First of all, it gives us a time frame. It says when. So what is this time frame of when? When God is saying when he brought them. And this is, by the way, also, this is God speaking to Moses. And he's literally telling Moses is getting ready to die. But before he dies, God is telling Moses everything that is getting ready to happen to these Israelites who's getting ready to go into the promised land. He says, when I have brought them to the land flowing with milk and honey, of which I swore to their fathers. Because remember, as much as Israel had been doing, these 12 tribes, as disobedient and hard-headed and rebellious as they have been, God still is a covenant keeper, and he kept his word. And so he brought these kids, these children, these Israelites into the promised land, and he says they're getting ready to cross over. And he says to Moses, when I've brought them to the land flowing with milk and honey, just like I promised their fathers, and they have eaten. And that's the other thing, not just the bringing of them to it, but when they have eaten and filled themselves and grown fat. At that point, they've eaten, they're full, but now they've grown fat. He says, then they will turn to other gods and serve them, and they will provoke me and break my covenant. So he's again giving us a time frame. And looking at that time frame, when I looked at the reference for that verse, one of the things it mentioned is that it was never a question of whether or not they were going to rebel. That was never a question whether or not they were going to sin, whether or not they were going to revert back to their idolatrous ways. That was never a question. The question was when. When. This is what the note says on that verse, Deuteronomy 31:20. It says, the question is not whether Israel was sin, but when. What should be done about their sinful behavior. Sadly, Israel's future behavior mirrored that of her past. And that part. And so a lot of times, like I remember when we were in Virginia and I was asked to speak at an AME conference. It was like a homecoming or something conference. And I had never spoke at an AME, service or anything like that before. I had never done it before. And so one of the things that I did, like I really didn't even know anything about AME. And so I began to look into it, and look up like that background, that history, how I got started. And one of the things that I realized is that the importance of remembering the past is because when we forget, we tend to repeat. Like when you forget, you tend to repeat. So it's important that we remember. And so yeah, it said that it wasn't a question of whether they were going to sin or not, because they were going to sin. It was a question of when. And it said that their future mirrors their past. And so where did I see that it was? Oh, here we go. It says, the song of witness was forever a nagging reminder of her lack of gratitude to God. And so that part, like it said in Ezekiel, when she began to trust in her own beauty, she began to stop being so grateful, stop, having all that gratitude, because now she's trusting in, she forgot, and so now she's trusting in her own self. Let's look at Nehemiah, which is the reference for this scripture here, again about them growing fat. The reference is Nehemiah chapter 9, verse 25 and 26. So let me turn over there. Nehemiah. Let's Chronicles. Okay. Nehemiah chapter 9. Verse 25 and 26 says the following. And they took strong cities and rich land, and possessed houses full of all goods, cisterns already dug, vineyards, olive groves, and fruit trees in abundance. So they ate and were filled and grew fat and delighted themselves in your great goodness. Verse 26 says, nevertheless, they were disobedient and rebelled against you, cast your law behind their backs, and killed your prophets who testified against them to turn them to yourself, and they worked great provocations. So, what's that? 25, 26. Yeah, so one of the things that we saw in verse 25 was how faithful God was. He brought them into cities that was already built up. There was no struggle. Like they didn't have to go in and start chopping wood so they could begin trying to make their houses. The houses was already made and it was already filled. They literally went in and pushed these people out and took over everything. And so it said they possessed these houses full of gold, cisterns that were already cisterns of water that was already dug. Like every single thing they needed, they was vineyards, there was olive groves, fruit trees in abundance, it said, and they ate and filled themselves and grew fat and delighted themselves in good. So again, I wanted to understand, what does that mean when you say they grew fat? What does that mean? So let's look at the next reference. Let's see. This is L, the letter L, which takes me back to Deuteronomy 32:15. So let's look at that next reference. And the next reference will be Psalm chapter 17, verse 10. Psalm chapter 17, verse number 10. Excuse me, I'm yawning. Been up since 1 o'clock this morning, so yeah. So it's almost 24 hours. So anyway, Psalm 17:10, this is what it says. It says, they have closed up their fat hearts with their mouths. They speak proudly. The reference note gives us our answer, just what I'm looking for. So it says, fat represented prosperity. Fat represented prosperity. But such a state of abundance could and often did lead to callousness and rebellion. So, fat represents abundance, prosperity, and that prosperity that ended up leading to callousness, which means that one is insensitive and cruel towards others. They have a disregard for others. So let's go back over to Deuteronomy, where we was at Deuteronomy chapter 32, and we were looking at verse 15. Okay. It says, but Jeshurun, and we know that that's Israel, all 12 tribes, grew fat. That means that they were prosperous. They, remember King Jesus said, I come that you might have life more abundantly. Back then, his people, Israel, it said they grew fat, but look, it didn't say it once. It said it at least 4 different ways. So it said, number one, it said you grew fat twice. Like, it literally said that one twice. So that's double. That's abundant. Like, that's more. And then it said you grew thick. That listen. Us fat girls, we don't always like to be called fat. Sometimes we prefer to be called thick. And that's what it says here. You grew fat. You grew fat, you grew thick, and then it says you are obese. And so obese is just morbidly overweight. And remember now, again, fat represented prosperity. So he's telling us just how prosperous that Jerusalem was, that Israel was. But we're going to learn about their prosperity. We're going to learn about that prosperity. So let's see. This is what the note says on that verse, Deuteronomy 32:15. It says, looking into the future, Moses saw a time when Israel will rebel against the Lord and break the covenant with him. It says, when they became fat or prosperous and thick, right? It says, with all the blessings of the land, they would attribute their prosperity to foreign gods, abandoning the God who made them and the rock of their salvation. It says, by their idolatry, they would provoke God to jealousy. And then it says a little bit more. And so that kind of goes into these next verses 16 on. And I don't want to go into those verses just yet. So let's kind of stick with this part here, that they grew fat. And so again, we understand that to be prosperous, right? But it also says something else. It says, and they kicked. Okay, so and literally kicked is put inside the emphasis on them growing fat. So I'm like, okay, I'm biting. You know, what is this? I want to know what is this to be thick, and I mean to kick, because it says, and they kicked, they grew fat, and they kicked. So the reference for that was 1 Samuel chapter 2 verse 29. I actually know that one. And so that reference had to do with what the man of God who was sent to go speak to Eli in reference to his sons Hophni and Phinehas, who needed to be sat down and shut down when it came to serving in God's temple and serving as priests, but Eli didn't do that. And so that's what he was talking about when he said they kicked. And so this is what it says. 1 Samuel chapter 2 verse 29. Let's see. Grab this. Okay, so it says, why do you kick at my sacrifice and my offering, which I have commanded in my dwelling place? Remember, Jerusalem is God's dwelling place. It's his house. It says, and honor your sons more than me, to make yourself fat with the best of all the offerings of Israel, my people. So to kick at something, and that's what the note says, to kick at something is to scorn or despise it. And that's how disrespectful those boys was in serving. They were very disrespectful. And so how they behaved again was described as kicking at God's sacrifice and his offering. So let's go back over to Deuteronomy chapter 32. We're again looking at verse number 15. Now we know that to grow fat is to be prosperous. One of the things that we also learn, Jeremiah chapter 5. Let's turn over there real quick, because I almost missed that one. Jeremiah chapter 5, and it's verse number 27 and 28, because there's something else about the growing fat that we don't want to miss. Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 27 and 28. This is what it says. Chapter 5. Oh, I almost read chapter 4. Okay, here we go. Chapter 5, verse 27 and 28. So is that right? 27 and 28. I'm going to start at verse 26 if you don't mind. So it says, for among my people are found wicked men. Did you hear? For among my people, we're talking about in the church, we're talking about in Jerusalem, which represents the church. God said, for among my people are found wicked men. Now, y'all know that that's true even today. That is true even today. I remember that it's happened a long time ago. I was living in Tennessee at the time. As a matter of fact, my husband, myself, and my son had just moved from Tennessee to Virginia. And there at the church that we attended, or that I attended, because my husband was a different denomination, and I had administrative duties at my church, so I never left my church. He never left his. He would go to his, because he was in the music department. He would go to his, and he would do what he had to do, and then he would leave and come over to my church. So anyway, the church that I attended, the young man who became the musician, music keyboardist, whatever, for the church, how about he ended up in a new, he's playing the keyboard, he's doing, like, for the choir, he's the music minister, quote unquote music minister for the choir, right? How about he ended up in the news? We were in Virginia, and we literally, I think somebody sent it to us, so there was a link. He ended up in the news for impersonating a police officer and pulling people over. He was not a police officer, but he was impersonating a police officer and pulling people over, and I think he was robbing them or something like that. I can't remember exactly, but whatever it was, he ended up in the news. His face was plastered in the news, and he ended up in jail. But that Sunday before, he was at choir. How about that one? So here, this is verse 26. It says, "For among my people are found wicked men." Like, that is true. That is true. That we see things in the news, and we don't always know about these people, who these people are. How about this one? There was, this was like about maybe a couple of months ago. I seen a news article where a pastor was in court because he was stealing land from small churches. Anyway, for among my people are found wicked men. It says, "They lie in wait as one who sets snares. They set a trap. They catch men. As a cage," this is verse number 27, "as a cage is full of birds, so their houses are full of deceit. Therefore they have become great and grown rich." Let's look at that one again. As a cage is full of birds. Okay, so I'm a dog owner, but I'm not a bird owner. But I have a friend who is a bird owner, and I don't know how many birds that she has. I don't know if she has one. I don't know if she has several. But usually, when you go to even zoos or the rescue places, and they have these cages, it's not a whole lot of birds in these cages, right? But it's more than one. It's usually more than one, but it's not a whole lot. Anyway, for the birds that's in these cages, it says here, "As a cage is full of birds, so their houses is full of deceit." And what that kind of makes me think of is promoters. Now you have people with different jobs, amongst God's people, because again, we're talking about God's people. It started off with that in verse 26. It said, "For among my people are found wicked men." So this part here where it says, "They lie in wait as one who sets snares. They set a trap. They catch men. As a cage is full of birds, so their houses are full of deceit." When I think of that, I think of promoters. I think of people who are running businesses, and they have clients, and so the clients would then be these birds in cages. They're various clients, right? And so it says, "So their houses are full of deceit. Therefore they have become great and grown rich." So how you handle your clients will cause you to grow. If you are good and effective in how you handle your clients, you will grow, right? And there'll be more, which goes back to the cage being full of birds. But also, is your business practice honest? Are your charges, the prices that you charge, is it honest? Or are you scheming and scamming? Are you overcharging? So it says, "Their houses are full of deceit, therefore they have become great and grown rich." Grown rich off of lies, off that deceit. It says they have grown fat. And remember, fat is prosperity. They are sleek. Yes, they have. They surpass the deeds of the wicked. They do not plead the cause of the fatherless, yet they prosper. And the right of the needy they do not defend. So what it says in the notes is this. It says, "Those who had grown rich through dishonest gain and through neglect of the fatherless were like fowlers lying in wait. As fowlers set a net with several tame birds to attract wild, unsuspecting birds, so too wicked men entrap innocent victims." So here it is referencing or giving reference to not only the fact that they become prosperous because of God, but also to the fact that they're becoming prosperous because of their dishonest gain, dishonest skills. So we're learning a lot about Jerusalem now. We're learning a lot. Remember, this represents the place of worship. Number one, they're full of pride. Why? Because they, what does it say? Ezekiel 16:15. Find the scripture again. So they're full of pride. They trust in their own beauty. They trust in their own beauty, in their own ability, in their own strength, in their own wealth. They're trusting in their own beauty. Let's see, we did the part about kicking at something which is despising it. Let's see, we did that kicking. And we looked at Jeremiah 5:27-28 about dishonest gain. Okay, I'm just trying to make sure that I'm covering all the bases with this and not leaving anything untouched. So, they have a cruel, insensitive disregard for others. They're getting rich, and some of it is on the up and up because, you know, God is blessed and He wants His people to be prosperous. But as they become more and more prideful, they start turning to unsavory business practices, unsavory behaviors, and one of them was that they are dishonest, like in their scales, and they're doing things for dishonest gain. So here's what else that was said in Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 15. It says, because we looked at the fact that they grew fat, thick, and obese. We looked at the fact now that they kicked, and again, to kick is to be scorned, or to despise something. So you kick at it. You know, like if you don't want something, you kind of like kick it away from you. So that's it. So then it says, he forsook God who made him and scornfully esteemed the rock of his salvation. So let's look at the first part. He forsook God who made him. I have Deuteronomy 31:16. Deuteronomy 31:16. It says, and the Lord said to Moses, behold. Now listen, remember me and these behold. If you've seen any of my other videos, you see how I act whenever I see behold. That means we need to pay close attention to this. So he's saying to Moses, he say, behold, you will rest with your fathers, and this people will rise and play the harlot with the gods of the foreigners of the land where they go to be among them, and they will forsake me, which means to leave. When you forsake, you abandon. And that's what God is literally saying. He said, these people, they're going to abandon me. You're going to sleep with your fathers. They're going to rise up and they're going to go and they're going to abandon me. He says, and break my covenant. His covenant. He says, and so that part in breaking the covenant, which he made with them. So now think about it. When God made covenant with the people, the original covenant, when he made that with the people, he gave them a set of commands, 10 to be exact. And in a part of the 10 commandments, number four that was listed in the 10 commandments was that they were to keep the Sabbath. That was number 4 in those 10 commandments. And so when it says, and they break my covenant, that covenant was the Sabbath, which was a perpetual covenant. It was a never-ending covenant. And look around you. People are not following the Sabbath today. The church that you attend might not even be following the Sabbath day. As a matter of fact, to be specific about it, if they are not shutting down everything on Saturday, Friday night, 6 p.m. Friday night into 6 p.m. Saturday morning. Saturday night, if they're not shutting things down in between it, if they're not teaching the people about the Sabbath, they're breaking covenant. God said it would happen. He said they will forsake me and break my covenant which I have made with them. There's a lot of people who don't know. As a matter of fact, this was like around the beginning of the year. We're in May, so we're 5 months in. This was around the beginning of the year when I saw this news article where this man went to church, and at church he asked the pastor about Sabbath. And how about the pastor not only shut him down but excommunicated him from the church? Gotta go look up these stories, y'all. When I saw it, it just blew me away. It blew me away. So God says that they will forsake me, he says, and break my covenant which I have made against them. And at that point, he is talking about the covenant of rest, Sabbath rest. Let's see, let's move on, because that was about them forsaking him, them leaving him, which is what Deuteronomy 32:15 says. It says, then he forsook God who made him. So they begin to turn as they became more and more prosperous. They begin to trust in their own wealth. They begin to trust in their own abilities, and they begin to turn away from God. And even down to the point of, what did it say again? It said, they will play the harlot with foreign gods. They will also go to be among them, and they will forsake me and break my covenant which I've made for them. So now we're going to look at that last part in Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 15, which says, and scornfully esteem the rock of his salvation. What does that mean? And scornfully esteem the rock of his salvation. Well, first of all, let me say this. Hold on. 1 second. First of all, let me say this. The reference note for that part took me to 2 Samuel chapter 22, verse 47. There was also a reference note in Psalm 89, verse 26. I didn't look that up, but I wanted to make sure to give that to you. So we're going over to 2 Samuel chapter 22, and we're going to look at verse number 47. And this is what it says. The Lord lives. Blessed be my rock. Let God be exalted, the rock of my salvation. Again, it says, the Lord lives. Blessed be my rock. Let God be exalted, the rock of my salvation. Now, in reference to the rock, which is what we're looking at, because in Deuteronomy 32:15, it said that they scornfully esteem the rock of his salvation. And by the way, to esteem something is when you have respect and admiration for it, but when you're scorning it, there is a display of disrespect, a display of contempt instead of admiration. So what they were scornfully esteeming was the rock of salvation. So we're told in the notes for 2 Samuel 22:47 to look over at verse number 2. So I decided to do that. So verse number 2 says, and he said, the Lord is my rock, my fortress, and my deliverer. In reference to that, the note said, rock denotes immovable, jutting cliff, not a mere stone. The word commonly occurs in the Bible to describe God's support and defense of his people. So whenever we read about the rock, we're reading about God's support and defense of his people. So one of the things that we see as far as how did they do that? How did they scornfully esteem the rock of salvation? Well, one of the ways that they did this was when they rejected God's help in order to go after the help of the surrounding nations in times of trouble. They forsook God at that time. Deuteronomy chapter 32 verse 16 continues. This is what it says. Deuteronomy 32:16. It says, they provoked him to jealousy with foreign gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. And remember, the charge that was given to Ezekiel at Ezekiel chapter 20 verse number 4 was that he was to make known to them the abominations of their fathers. And so again here in Jerusalem it said that they provoked him to jealousy with foreign gods, and with abominations they provoked him to anger. With that being the case, and because we have to make this thing known so that it is aware, that one becomes aware of what they're doing, either via observation, inquiry, or information, we're gonna dig even deeper into this scripture about provoking God and about provoking him to jealousy and provoking him to anger because of the abominations. The reference for that took me to 1 Kings chapter 14 verse 22. 1 Kings chapter 14 verse 22. And so what I decided to do, let me read this verse to you first, and then I'm gonna let you know what I decided to do. So 1 Kings chapter 14, and I have verses 22 through 24. This is what it says. It says, now Judah did evil in the sight. Now see, first we were talking about, so we're talking about Jerusalem, right? But Jerusalem is a place of worship, and all of Israel, all 12 tribes went to Jerusalem to worship. Now, in those other verses we talked about Israel. Israel represents the 12. Israel represents the 12 tribes. But here in 1 Kings chapter 14, we're now talking about Judah. Judah only represents 2 tribes. And so it says, now Judah did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins, which they committed more than all that their fathers had done. It says, for they also built for themselves high places, sacred pillars, and wooden images on every high hill and under every green tree. It says, and there were also perverted persons in the land. They did according to all the abominations of the nations which the Lord had cast out before the children of Israel. So what we're going to do is this, because there are several things that is listed here. Number 1, it says they did evil in the sight of the Lord. They did evil in his sight. It says they provoked him to jealousy with their sins that they committed more than their fathers have done. It said that they built for themselves high places, sacred pillars, or high places would be your places of worship. Have you ever thought about this? Have you ever wondered, why is there so many churches? Like, have you ever been in a city where, like, almost in on every corner was a church? Like, have you ever experienced that? I know I experienced that in Virginia. It seemed like every other block had a church in there. So listen, it says here that they built themselves high places and sacred pillars. Or high places, church, your sacred pillar. A pillar would be like a platform. So they built for themselves high places, sacred pillars, wooden images on every high hill. Now that part where it says wooden images on every high hill, what that makes me think about is the churches where it has the steeple, and on top of the steeple is the cross. That's what it makes me think about. Let me see. I was going to try to draw it, but I think you know what I'm talking about. How some of those churches, you know, they have the roof, and on top of the roof is a cross. So it says, they also built for themselves high places, sacred pillars, and wooden images on every high hill and under every green tree. And under every green tree. It says, and there were also perverted persons in the land. So we're going to talk about that. It says they did abominations. They did according to all the abominations of the nations. So the very thing that God told them not to do when he told them, the people, to not do as the nations around him, that they went and did it anyway. It says they did according to all the abominations of the nations, which the Lord had cast out before his children. So here's the thing. Because it's such an extensive list, and because I want to go over each of them and break this thing down and see if what was written, can we see that today? And so with that being the case, we're going to stop right here. We're going to end the video right here. This video is really short today. We're going to end it right here, and we're going to pick up tomorrow with video number 3. And yeah, we're going to go into more detail tomorrow. So I thank you for watching this video. I hope that things that we're discussing, that you're understanding it, that I'm doing it clear enough. If there's anything that I'm not being clear about, please let me know so that I can go back over it, because again, God said to make it known to them. And so to make it known, it has to be clear. And you know, we just did that study on Habakkuk, where God told Habakkuk, make it plain. He said, write the vision on tablets. He said, make it plain that they who read it can run, right, and not faint. So I have to make sure that I'm sharing everything as clearly as possible. Now, when I did this video the first time, I actually did the counting of the omers. So I am going to go and get that clip and insert that clip right in here somewhere about the counting of the omer, because we're now in the week of humility. And with all of that being said, until we meet again, until we meet again, until we meet again, rest in peace until we meet again. So may the Lord be with you and bless you and keep you safe until we meet again. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. You all have a great rest of your day. Okay, bye. So I want to let y'all go, but let me get this omer before it's too late. We're in a new week. We're in the week of humility. This is gonna be a long week. That's me saying that. So this is what it says. During the 5th week, 2 more weeks to go before Pentecost. It says, during the 5th week of counting the omer, we examine and refine the emotional attribute of humility. Humility and the result yielding should not be confused with weakness and lack of self-esteem. Humility is modesty. It is acknowledgement. It is saying thank you to God. We just talked about that. We literally just talked about how what started Jerusalem on this downfall, what started the house of worship on this downfall of that led them to becoming called harlots, was they lacked gratitude. They stopped being grateful. They stopped saying thank you. So it says humility is saying thank you to God. It is clearly recognizing your qualities and strengths and acknowledging that they're not your own. They were given to you by God for a higher purpose than just satisfying your own needs. We all have been given gifts. We all have been given talents. And it's not for us. It's so that we can be helpers one unto the other. It says humility is modesty. It is recognizing how small you are, which allows you to realize how large you can become. And that makes humility so formidable. A full cup cannot be filled. When you are filled with yourself and your needs, I and nothing else, there is no room for more. When you empty yourself before something greater than yourself, your capacity to receive increases beyond your previous perceived limits. Humility is the key to transcendence, to reach beyond yourself. Only true humility gives you the power of total objectivity. Humility is sensitivity. It is healthy shame out of recognition that you can be better than you are and that you can expect more of yourself. Although humility is silent, it is not void. It is a dynamic expression of life that includes all 7 qualities: love, discipline, compassion, endurance, humility, bonding, and sovereignty. So that's about this week. We are now in the week of humility, day 29, Chesed of Had, or loving kindness and humility. So this is today's. This is what it says. Examine the love in your humility. Healthy humility is not demoralizing. It brings love and joy, not fear. I'm going to say that one again. Healthy humility is not demoralizing. It brings love and joy, not fear. Humility that lacks love has to be re-examined for its authenticity. I'm sorry, I said it wrong. Humility that lacks love has to be re-examined for its authenticity. Sometimes humility can be confused with low self-esteem, which will cause it to be unloving. Humility brings love because it gives you the ability to rise above yourself and love another. Does my humility cause me to be more loving and giving, more expansive, or does it inhibit and constrain me? So the exercise today is, before praying with humility and acknowledgement of God, give some charity. It will enhance your prayers. So that's today. Loving kindness and humility. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. Come back for video 3 of this new series, which is, will you judge them, son of man? Will you judge them? Who are we talking about? Do you remember? We shared it in this video. Who is it that we're talking about being judged, that God is calling to be judged? Okay. Thank you for watching. Bye.